If you've ever thought about getting into tape and you had no idea where to start, well, this is the video I wish I had when I was getting started. Getting into tape can feel incredibly overwhelming. Suddenly, you're seeing terms like 2-track, 4-track, 15 inches per second, and everyone online seems to have a different opinion on what you should buy. When I first started looking into tape, I had all of those same questions. Which machine should I buy? Do I need a reel-to-reel? Is cassette good enough? How many channels do I actually need? Does tape speed make much of a difference? And what's the difference between a 2-track and a 4-track machine? So in this video, I'm going to be answering all of those questions. We're going to compare reel-to-reel with cassette, break down channel count, tape speeds, reel sizes, and a whole lot more. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to give you guys my personal recommendation based off of 3 different budgets. The first one being $200, a $500 budget, and a $1,000 or more budget. So no matter where you're starting from, you'll have a much better idea of which tape machine is best for you. All right, so before we start comparing different tape machines, there's one really important question that you have to answer first. And that is, what do you want tape for? One of the biggest mistakes you could probably make is to start looking for tape machines before deciding what role you want tape to play in your studio. That's the first thing we've got to answer, because once we figure that out, it's pretty much going to affect every decision we make from this point forward. For most people, I think there are 3 common workflows. Now, the first one we'll call the analog enthusiast. This is someone who wants to record as much as possible to tape. Maybe you're trying to track an entire band to tape, maybe you're trying to record an album to tape, or potentially you're just trying to bounce an entire session to tape. If that's your goal, you're probably going to want a machine with higher fidelity and more channels, so that way you can work more efficiently. The second workflow is the home producer. This is probably where most people watching this video fall under. You're not really trying to replace your DAW, you just want to use tape as another creative tool. So for an example, you want to take a drum bus and you want to send it to tape to add some saturation, maybe some compression, and a little bit of character. The good news is that you don't really need a crazy setup for something like this. You can get really incredible results with something much simpler and often much cheaper. And for the third group, we'll call it the people that want to master or print entire mixes to tape. Here the goal usually isn't to add a lot of color or obvious distortion. Instead, you're looking for clean, high fidelity transfer with just a subtle touch of that tape sound. Now, this kind of workflow often benefits from machines that prioritize fidelity over character. So none of these approaches is better than the others. They're just different ways of using tape. So for the rest of this video, keep in mind what your workflow is, because once you understand that, choosing the right machine becomes a whole lot easier. Channel count is pretty straightforward. The more channels your machine has, the more individual tracks you can record to tape at the same time. Now, it's important to note that you don't need a machine with a lot of channels to use tape. Even with a simple 2-channel machine, you can send as many tracks from your DAW to tape as you want. You'll just be doing it basically 2 at a time. The catch is that every time you record a new pass to tape, and then you bring that back into your computer, you'll need to line it back up. Tape isn't quite as accurate as digital recording, so every time you record to tape, send it back to the computer, there will be a slight drift in the timing. It's not something that's really difficult to fix, but it will add time to your workflow. This is where higher channel count machines start to make a little bit more sense. If you're going to be recording an entire band, transferring a lot of individual tracks, or just converting an entire mix to an analog workflow, being able to record 4, 8, maybe even 16 tracks simultaneously means everything's going to stay perfectly in sync with itself because it was all recorded at the same time. Of course, there is a trade-off. More channels generally means a bigger machine, a more expensive machine. There's going to be more electronics to maintain and more to calibrate. There's simply a lot more that can go wrong over time. For most home producers, I would recommend sticking with a 2-channel machine. That seems to be the sweet spot. If your goal is adding tape character to your music, you probably don't need to send 6 individual drum mics to tape, for an example. You can just take the stereo drum bus and send that to tape. You'll get something surprisingly close while keeping your setup and your maintenance a whole lot simpler. Okay, so let's clear up one of the more confusing parts about getting into tape, and that is 2-track versus 4-track. If you've decided that you want a 2-channel machine, you'll probably see listings that say 2-track or 4-track. And at first glance, you might think that 4-track means you have 4 different channels, but that's not actually what that means. Track count basically is how the machine divides the piece of tape. On a 4-track machine, the 1/4-inch tape is divided into 4 narrow tracks. A typical stereo machine records your left and right channels onto tracks 1 and 3 as the tape moves forward. When you flip the tape over, it records onto tracks 2 and 4. just like flipping a cassette. You still only have 2 audio channels, but because you're using both sides of the tape, you effectively double your recording time. A 2-track machine works differently. Instead of splitting the tape into 4 tracks, it uses almost the entire width of the tape for just 2 tracks, left and right. The tape only records in one direction, so once you've reached the end, you're done. The trade-off is pretty simple. A 4-track machine gives you more recording time from a single reel, while a 2-track machine dedicates more physical tape to each channel. More tape generally means better signal-to-noise ratio, lower noise, and higher fidelity. You'll also notice that many 2-track machines were designed for more professional applications, so they tend to support higher tape speeds, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but they also tend to cost more. So which one should you choose? If your goal is mastering mixes or getting the cleanest, highest fidelity recordings as possible, a 2-track machine is going to be hard to beat. But for most home producers, I would not overlook a 4-track machine. They can still sound fantastic, and the extra recording time is a nice bonus. So the thing to keep in mind is that track count and channel count are not the same thing. Take the Tascam 388 for an example. That is an 8-channel recorder that fits 8 individual tracks onto a single 1/4-inch piece of tape. Most 8-track machines are going to use 1/2-inch tape, so the 388 packs those tracks much closer together. It's a great example of why it's important to look at both the channel count and the track format when you're comparing machines. Next, let's talk about tape speed. Now, tape speed is measured in inches per second, or IPS, and just like with track count, tape speed is another trade-off between fidelity and recording time. The faster the tape moves past the record head, the more physical tape your audio is spread across. Generally speaking, this means a higher fidelity, lower noise, and a better high frequency response. The downside is that you're using tape much faster, so your reels don't last as long. The 3 speeds you'll most commonly come across are going to be 3 3/4, 7.5, and 15 inches per second. At 15 inches per second, you're going to get excellent clarity, low noise, and it's a very popular choice for professional recording. Now, the trade-off is you're going to burn through a lot of tape. 7.5 inches per second is right down the middle. It sounds really good, but it gives you twice the amount of recording time than that of 15 inches per second. Many people feel it has a little more warmth and personality. For a lot of home studios, it's a great balance between quality and tape consumption. Then you have 3 3/4 inches per second. This is where you start to hear the limitations of tape a bit more. You'll typically get more hiss, less top end detail, and a darker overall sound. Now, for many people, those imperfections are exactly what makes it so appealing. If you're chasing character over absolute fidelity, 3 3/4 can absolutely sound fantastic. And I did want to mention that these are just generalizations. Every machine has a different design. They'll be calibrated different. Take for an example, this TIAC over here. I recorded everything pretty much to 3 3/4 on that machine, and it sounded surprisingly good while maintaining all of the top end detail. So just because you're recording to a slower speed, don't assume poor sound quality. Most consumer and prosumer machines offer 2 selectable speeds. Now, a deck that tops out around 7.5 inches per second will usually have 3 3/4, while a machine designed for 15 inches per second often includes 7.5 inches per second as its lower speed. You'll also notice that many 2-track machines are capable of higher tape speeds than 4-track machines, which is another reason why they're often associated with higher fidelity recordings. So the next thing you'll come across is reel size. Now, the 2 most common reel sizes that you'll see are 7-inch and 10.5 inch. The biggest difference between these 2 sizes is pretty simple. The larger the reel, the more tape it can hold, and the longer the recording time will be before you have to switch reels. When I bought my TIAC for the studio, I knew I wanted a machine that could take the 10.5 inch reels. Now, part of that is practical, and you do get longer recording time, but for me personally, I just love the way that the big reels look, and they become a centerpiece of the studio. That said, not every machine can accommodate them, so smaller consumer decks are typically designed for 7-inch reels, while larger prosumer and professional machines will often support the 10.5 inch reels. One nice thing is that most of the machines that can accommodate the 10.5 inch reels can also run 7-inch reels. Many even have a switch that lets you select through the reel size so that the tape tension stays correct. Now, the opposite is not true for machines that take the 7-inch reels. You will not be able to play the 10.5-inch reels on them. There's one more thing that you should be aware of if you're planning on buying a machine that uses the larger reels. Most 10.5-inch metal reels require NAB hub adapters to lock securely onto the machine. They're not particularly expensive, but they are an essential accessory. Without them, you won't be able to mount the reels properly. Now, the standard 7-inch reels, on the other hand, slide directly onto the little spindle and don't require any adapters at all. Another thing to consider is the age of the machine. Many reel-to-reels that you'll find out there today are somewhere between 30 and 60 years old, so it's important to remember that you are buying a vintage piece of electronics. Newer machines from the late 80s and the 90s may require less restoration simply just because they are newer, and oftentimes they will have more modern features. On the other hand, older machines from the 60s and 70s often have a certain charm to them. Many people love their design, their simplicity, and in some cases even their sound, but because they're older, you should expect that they may need some maintenance, and replacement parts can be a little bit tricky to find. That doesn't mean you should avoid older machines altogether. Some of the best tape machines ever made came from that era, and they're still running exceptionally well today. But it is important to know how well it's been cared for. That's going to be a much more important thing to ask than what decade it came from. Okay, so let's say that you're on a budget. Is tape still worth getting into? Absolutely. The great thing about tape is you don't have to start with these big reel-to-reels. A stereo cassette deck can be an incredibly affordable way to get into that analog workflow while adding tape character to your mix. Cassette sometimes gets a bad reputation because people immediately associate it with being too lo-fi, but if you're using a decent cassette deck and you pair that with good quality tape, it can sound surprisingly good. Now, it's going to be a little bit more noisy than a reel-to-reel, but that can also be a part of the charm. You're going to get really unique textures and character that, when paired with the right source, actually sounds really good. I recently picked up this TX stereo cassette deck, and I got this thing for just $40. Now, it still needs a little bit of work, but even in its current condition, it's quickly becoming one of my favorite things to send tracks through. If you guys checked out my last video, I actually produced an entire song using this deck as an effect, and if you're curious to see what cassette can really sound like on a modern production, I definitely recommend checking that video out. If you're shopping on a tight budget, I'd actually look at stereo cassette decks before something like a Porta Studio. Porta Studios have been really popular over the last few years, and because of that, they're often a lot more expensive than they used to be. However, there are still a lot of great stereo cassette decks out there that you can find well under $100. Another really cool thing about cassette is the tapes themselves are way more affordable. I picked up these two cassettes from ATR Magnetics, and I believe it cost me less than $20 for both of them. Now, when you compare that to a brand new 10.5-inch reel, that can easily cost over $100. So if your budget is limited, cassette is a fantastic way to get started with tape. And even if the money isn't a deciding factor, I still think a cassette deck deserves a place in the studio. Reel-to-reel and cassette each have their own character, and there are plenty of times where I actually reach for the cassette deck just because I want that extra grit and texture. All right, so after everything we've talked about, what would I recommend? Well, I'm going to break it down into 3 different budgets. We'll say $200, a $500 budget, and a $1,000 budget. Okay, so starting off with the $200 budget, I think personally the best value is going to be a stereo cassette deck. At that price, you can often find a really nice working deck. You can buy brand new tapes, you can pick up cables, and you can do all of that while staying within the budget. Could you find a reel-to-reel for that price? Absolutely. But you'll need to be patient, and finding one in good working condition is going to be a little bit more challenging. Now, if your budget is around $500, this is where reel-to-reel starts to basically become more practical. I would personally start looking for a 2-channel, 4-track machine, especially something from the 70s, maybe the early 80s. You can often find solid, well-built machines in that range, and for someone just getting into tape for the first time, I think they're a great balance of sound quality, affordability, with relatively simple maintenance. So once you get to that $1,000 budget, you can pretty much start to look for machines based on your workflow as opposed to your budget. If your goal is mastering mixes with the highest fidelity possible, I would look towards a quality 2-track machine. If your goal is to send multiple sources to tape at the same time, then it makes sense to step it up to a machine with more channels. Here's where I would be looking for 4 channels, 8 channels, maybe even 16. And if you're like me, someone who is mainly just trying to add analog character to the recording, then a machine like this course, this is the Tascam 34, is incredibly versatile. It's got 4 channels, it can do 15 inches per second, it has pitch control, and basically enough flexibility to handle anything I want. One of the nice things about spending a little bit more money when you're buying a machine is that you can get one that's been serviced, it can be in better condition, and those things tend to save you a lot of money and headache down the road. At the end of the day though, don't feel that you need to buy the biggest or the most expensive tape machine. The best tape machine is the one that fits your workflow, obviously the one that you can afford and actually inspires you to make music. So those are my recommendations, but I would love to hear yours. If you guys own a tape machine or you're looking at buying a tape machine, let me know down in the comments what you're looking at. Hopefully this video was helpful, and if you want to see more with tape, I highly recommend you check out this video where I recorded a song to this cassette deck that I bought for $40. And if you want to see something a little more hi-fi, check out this video where I recorded a song like it's 1984. As always, I appreciate you guys for hanging out, and I'll see you on the next one.